Hey kids, my name's Jake, and welcome to Jake's Adventure. I want to take you guys on an adventure through Texas history. First, let me introduce you to my buddy Carly. She loves a good adventure. Look, here she comes now.
Hey Jake, what's going on? Oh, hey everybody. Jake, did you tell everybody about the game that's going on during the adventure?
Oh no, I didn't. We should tell them the rules of how it works. Your teacher is going to hand out some colored index cards. Make sure everyone gets a set. If you look on one side of the card, you'll see a letter A, B, C, or D.
Make sure you all are ready for the adventure when you hear this sound. The game begins. A question will pop up with a multiple choice answer. All you need to do is hold up the card you think is correct. If you think your answer is correct, then write the question number on the opposite side of the card.
Okay, now you know the rules of the game. Let's saddle up and get ready for our adventure.
Let's start off in the mid 1700s. People still believed in having a king. This period is where people thought that God gave the king the right to rule, otherwise known as the divine right of kings.
But then people began to challenge this belief with science and logic. This caused people to get uneasy. This period was also known as the Enlightenment.
Now we're in the period of Father Hidalgo calling for independence. Father Hidalgo was an important person to Mexico gaining independence. He gave a speech called the Grito de Dolores, which rallied people to believe that Mexico could be independent from Spain. In 1811, Hidalgo was captured by the Spanish guards and executed. However, his dreams for Mexico's independence never died.
Okay, you know what time it is. Here's your question. What was the theory called that gave the king God's consent to rule? A. The Divine Right of Kings. B. Taco Tuesday. C. Charles Williams. And D. The Enlightenment.
Okay, everybody, hold your answers up.
Okay, kids, don't forget to write down the question number on the back of your card before we move on.
Now we're in the period of Father Hidalgo calling for independence. Father Hidalgo was an important person to Mexico gaining independence. He gave a speech called Grito de Dolores, which rallied people to believe that Mexico could be independent from Spain. In 1811, Hidalgo was captured by the Spanish guards and executed. However, his dreams for Mexico's independence never died.
Later that year, Hidalgo's supporters led a group of rebels to overthrow Spanish control in San Antonio. Once overthrown, they named the town Las Casas, and then took control of La Bahia and Nacogdoches. Later that year, on January 22nd, Las Casas declared itself independent. In Spain, Hidalgo's followers continued to fight for independence years after his death. After Juan Bautista died, Jose Bernardo Gutierrez left Navarro Santander and fled to Louisiana, re-established an army.
Gutierrez and his army commander Augustus McGee marched back to Texas and briefly took control before being defeated by Spain. Meanwhile, in Spain, a group of liberals staged a revolt, and in 1820 they forced the king to make changes that frightened the conservatives in Mexico. The conservatives had opposed independence, but the revolution in Spain changed their minds.
They joined with Father Hidalgo's followers to defeat Spanish forces. On August 24th, 1821, a treaty was signed making Mexico independent from Spain. Though Texas is independent from Spain, much of the Spanish influence lives on today, such as rivers, cities, landforms, foods, and everyday items remind us of Texas's Spanish heritage.
Question number 2. When did Mexico gain its independence from Spain and become its own country? A. August 24th, 1821. B. On St. Patrick's Day. C. 4th of July. D. April 29th, 1820.
Okay, kids, don't forget to write down the question number on the back of your card before we move on.
Now let's take a look at the surge of immigration to Texas. We'll start off with Moses Austin. He was born in Connecticut in 1761, and during his business dealings, he developed a keen interest in mining. After learning of George Morgan's colony in what is now Missouri, Austin moved to operate a lead mine. Austin traveled to Texas in 1820 with an ambitious plan in mind. He wanted to bring 300 families from the United States to Texas. Austin traveled 800 miles for approval from Spanish officials. Once he reached San Antonio, he confronted Governor Antonio Martinez with a signed petition. Martinez strictly followed Spanish policies and had to reject Austin's petition. The Spanish officials had seen too many filibusters try to seize Spanish lands before. Disappointed, Austin prepared to leave Texas. Little did he know that his luck was about to change. Austin informed an old friend of his, Baron de Bastrop, of his plans, and Baron agreed to influence the Spanish officials to help Austin win their approval. Bastrop arranged another meeting with Martinez, who agreed to send Austin's request to a higher authority. Already expecting a positive decision, Austin then returned to the east to begin recruiting colonists for Texas. Austin had become very ill and was dying when he learned that his plans had been
On his
approved.
deathbed, Austin asked his son Stephen to carry out his dream of colonizing Texas. At a young age of 27, Stephen F. Austin's father died in 1821. Stephen set aside his dreams of becoming a lawyer and set to Texas to fulfill his father's dreams. Stephen was born in Virginia and raised on the frontier. After attending Transylvania University in Kentucky, he served as a legislator for 6 years and briefly as a judge in Arkansas. Despite Stephen's youth, he proved to be the perfect person to make his father's vision a reality.
Stephen Austin's first act was to visit San Antonio and meet with Governor Martinez. Erasmo Seguin, a well-known and respected citizen of San Antonio, had been appointed by Governor Martinez to help Austin. On August 1821, Seguin escorted Austin into the city. Governor Martinez legally transferred Moses Austin's grant to his son Stephen's name. Then, Austin had to choose a sign for his colony. After looking over the area, Austin chose land between the Lavaca and San Jacinto rivers. It seemed like the perfect location, unlike the heavily forested lands of eastern Texas. It would be easy enough to clear, and unlike West Texas, it received enough rainfall to raise crops. The grassy prairie provided a good place for settlers to grow sugarcane, cotton, corn, and other crops that they were all familiar with. Austin determined that the first settlement would be settled along the lower Colorado River. After deciding the colony's location, Austin traveled to New Orleans to recruit his colonists. He knew that the colony relied on the character of the colonist. By the term of the impresarial grant, colonists had to be of good character and had to either be Catholic or agree to become Catholic.
Austin also looked for people who were willing to accept hard times. Colonists were required to pledge their loyalty to Spain, as shown in the following record of two Texas settlers, Samuel Davenport and William Barr. The impresarial grant allowed Austin to bring 300 families to Texas. These families were known as the Old 300. Settlers that were farmers received 177 acres of land. Those who raised cattle received 4,428 acres of land, and many settlers received both. After Stephen Austin made sure that the colonists were qualified, Baron de Bastrop's government's agent gave land titles to all the colonists.
In the beginning of 1821, settlers began to arrive. Some traveled through Nacogdoches along the El Camino Real, and others came by boat. Stephen Austin purchased a small boat named the Lively to help transport colonists to the mouth of the Colorado River. However, miscommunication caused a problem. Instead of the Colorado River, they were transported to the Brazos River. Austin waited at the Brazos River, but some settlers gave up and decided to return home.
Here is the name of the group that Austin brought over to Texas that had 300 families. A. The 50 soldiers. B. The Old 300. C. Cowboys of Texas, and D. The Lone Wolves. Many impresarios had opened the door to Texas, and it had opened the door of opportunity to many colonists. As an abundant amount of people poured westward into the gates of Texas, the letter GTT became a common sight across the abandoned cabins. The letters GTT mean Gone to Texas, which also states the previous family of the house had packed up and moved to Texas or beyond the Sabine and Red River. The reason many people had left Texas is to escape the problems in America. Some even left for adventure. Many people also left because there was plentiful and inexpensive lands.
The contrast of land was a large part of the colonists buying the land, and the land was 12.5 cents per acre, and the price could be paid out for several years. Colonists often came through the Tennessee and Ohio rivers because the rivers flow into the Mississippi River. Traveling along the river with boats was often used because it was much easier than traveling by foot on land. Some families followed the trail that stretched southward from Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas through Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas into Texas. Some often came from Missouri, and others traveled westward through the southern states of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Colonists coming through Texas often traveled by horseback, and the rest walked because they lacked oxen or horse, and they often lacked a wagon. People who had horses generally had a covered wagon, a boat, or traveled on foot.
This limited the supplies they could bring with them. Most immigrants were coming on foot and could carry no more than a rifle for protection and hunting, extra ammunition, salt to flavor and preserve their food, and perhaps a few extra clothes. Those who rode on horses could bring even more tools and supplies, especially if they brought a pack horse. Immigrants who had wagons could bring even more supplies, but they usually walked beside the wagon so the wagons could be used to carry all the supplies they could pack. Other colonists floated their belongings down the river on rafts or boats.
Question number 4. What caused many people to go to Texas and establish their lives there? A. Cheap land and plentiful resources. B. To avoid the vicious natives. C. To avoid rabid animals. D. To avoid a hurricane. Okay, guys, don't forget to write down the number to your question on the back of your card.
The settlers of colonial Texas were varied, as well as the routes they traveled. Even though most immigrated from the U.S., others also came from Mexico and Europe. Early Texas colonists generally varied from German, Irish, Polish, Mexican, and African descendants, among others.
A large portion of the population of the Tejanos settled in San Antonio and along the Rio Grande. Martin de Leon founded the first of many Tejano colonies in Texas. Other powerful Tejanos in Texas were the Erasmo and the Juan Seguin, the Renzo de Zavala, and Jose Antonio Navarra. The African American population steadily increased as Texas grew. Many enslaved African Americans were bought by settlers from Southern America.
Slavery was illegal in Mexico after 1829, but the law was seldom enforced. Mexico did offer protection and legal rights for the free African Americans that were living in Texas. Among them were Greenberry Logan, Hendrick Arnold, and William Goins. These men later helped Texas win independence. Texas's land had plenty of resources for the colonists, with plenty of fish in the streams and animals in the forest, as well as on the prairie. Food was bountiful for the skilled hunters. In 1834, a Texas colonist wrote about the animals that could be hunted in Texas.
In addition to hunting, colonists often foraged for wild berries and nuts to feed themselves and their families. Some also had staples or basic food products such as salt, sugar, and flour that they brought with them. The settlers eventually planted crops and built mills to grind sugar cane and grains into syrup and flour. However, colonial Texans rarely enjoyed a balanced diet. Fresh vegetables were available usually only during the growing season. As a result, colonists generally only ate meat and dried vegetables for much of the year. Corn was a primary staple and was used in most every meal. It could be eaten fresh or dried as well as ground into meal to be prepared in various ways. In addition to providing food, the Texas land also provided materials that could be used to build homes. When timber was found, the colonists would use it to build shelters, like log cabins. Rock was generally used to build homes on the western side of the settlement. Usually colonists began with a room cabin, and as the family grew larger, a possible second cabin could be built. To connect these, pathways were built between the cabins, usually with a breezeway. Most of the cooking was done over an open fireplace. The fireplace also provided warmth and light for the entire cabin. The floor was often bare, with wooden planks elevated off the floor. Colonists often used corn husk or tree moss to create a mattress. If the mattress were not placed in the sun, fleas and ticks would thrive in the mattress, making most people very ill from the sickness of the bug bites.
Furniture was made from the nearby resources, such as wood and the trees. In order for Texas citizens to obtain land grants, they had to be or agree to become Catholic. Many only agreed to become Catholic to obtain the large amounts of land they received. Those who were faking being Catholic had to be baptized to become officially Catholic. San Felipe de Austin became known as the Molden Catholics because there were so little priests in Texas they worship on their own time. Doak McCann established the first Methodist church, and Thomas J. Pilgrim preached the faith to all the citizens. Colonists faced tons of challenges, such as disease. This was one of the most common hardships the colonists faced, as well as they had to travel to many different towns to visit the town doctor, who most of the time couldn't even help them.
Colonists who were ill or injured used homemade medicines that usually didn't work. Another conflict that Texans faced were natives. In 1824, Aylett Buckner, an agent of Stevens, made a treaty with the Tonkawas and the Wacos. The treaty reduced the tension between the natives and Texans, but other natives saw Texans as a threat that could be driven out with fear. Colonists began to feel unprotected due to the frequent Karawa attacks. The tribes had attacked many times before, and Austin decided to make a militia.
The militia was called the Texas Rangers. The purpose of the small militia was to prevent the raiding parties from succeeding in their plan. Anglo-Americans accepted the hardships but soon realized the unfairness between Mexicans and Anglo-Americans. By 1830, the tensions were growing.
Question number 5. What was the name of the group of Indians that held vicious attacks on the settlers? A. The Apaches. B. The Karankawas. C. The Navajo. D. The Dohas. This is the period where the differences between the Texans and Mexicans arose. Most of the Texans were too busy adjusting to life in Mexico. There were cultural differences between the Texans and the Mexican officials. This soon caused problems to arise. Most of the colonists were willing to accept the new conditions. However, some of the colonists didn't accept the new conditions. This soon caused them to make very little effort to be loyal citizens, most of them faking loyal citizenship but kept their customs. Mexican officials feared that Texas citizens were becoming too independent. Mexican officials believed that the government should be able to have all the power, but the Texans believed that they should get to choose to accept or reject the laws. This was the difference between the Texas colonists and the Mexican government. Question number 6. What caused the tensions to increase between Texans and Mexicans? A. Cultural differences. B. Eating habits. C. The Battle of Gettysburg. Or D. Insults to Taco Tuesday.
We're going to backtrack a little to 1824, when the tensions between Texans and Mexicans were becoming quite a pesky problem. The power had gotten out of hand between the states and governments. So the Mexican government decided to make the Constitution of 1824, which allowed the states to accept or reject a law that was made by national government. This eased tensions for the most part between Texans and Mexicans.
Most Texans supported this constitution because this balanced the power between the states and the government. However, Mexicans who believed that the government should control all the laws and decide whether or not they were followed disagreed with these people. They were called Centralists. The Texans supported the 1824 Constitution because it let up on them, making starting a life in Texas a little bit easier. This caused tension between the Centralists and the people who supported the states' rights to increase. Question number 7. What was the major difference between the Centralist and the states' right supporters? A. The economy. B. The officials of Mexico. C. The government and the thought to make up their own mind. Or D. The environment.
We're back in 1830. A major panic has swept across Mexican officials as the immigration of Anglo-Americans kept a steady increase. They feared that Americans would outnumber the population and possibly overthrow Mexican officials. The Mexicans made a rash decision and passed the law of April 6, 1830. This completely contradicted the Constitution of 1824.
The law took away the impresario grants, which stopped the immigration to Mexico. This applied to all grants that had not been completed. This only stopped the American immigration, but Mexico still strongly encouraged European settlers to move to Mexico. They would even pay for it, as well as provide for land.
Purposely targeted the slowing, if not stopping, immigration of Anglo-Americans by making slavery illegal. Since most Anglo-Americans crossed over to Mexico with slaves, this was also a large setback. The law also put customs duty taxes on everyday items. This means all objects that were transported to Mexico from the U.S. had a hefty tax on them that colonists could not avoid paying.
This frightened many Anglo colonists because, with no one in the cotton fields to pick the cotton, the production in Texas would come to a big halt. This caused Texas's economy to drop majorly. The citizens of Texas felt betrayed by Mexico and wronged. The law also raised sires of political question within the state. People who believed in states' rights felt that Mexico had taken it way too far. Instead of Mexico diffusing the problem, they turned the colonists into a ticking time bomb. Question number 8. What was the final straw to the Texans that made them furious? A. The bounty for an illegal slave. B. The law of April 6, 1830. C. The revolt of Jameson. D. The fight in public Texas.
1832, tensions between Mexicans and Texans are out of control. A dispute over two slaves has broken out between Mexicans and Texans. A group of 150 protesters has come to get the two arrested innocent Texans, William Travis Barrett and Jack, out of jail. Austin came to support, but was forced to fight his way back to Anahuac due to a riot. After Austin reached his cannon, he quickly loaded it aboard his ship.
Mexico had pushed it too far as Austin rode up the Brazos River, sailing to the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico to reach Velasco. When they prepared to unload the ship, they were stopped by the Mexican officials and denied access to pass. Soon enough, a fight had broken out between the two groups. The battle resulted in 10 Texans and 5 Mexicans dead. The Mexicans surrendered due to the lack of ammunition for their weapons. When Austin finally arrived, they found the conflict had already been resolved. This was known as the Battle of Velasco. Question number 9. What was the original conflict that caused the outbreak for fighting? A. Cost of food. B. The outbreak of the plague. C. The Christian revolt. Or D. The arrest of 2 innocent Texans.
Still in the same time of 1832, but we're in one of the first of 2 secret conventions. The Texans were pleased with their early success in the battles with Mexico, but they were still very unhappy with the rash decisions of the Mexican government. 52 delegates gathered in San Felipe to elect a president for the convention. The delegates chose Austin as their president. The group chose to support the true Mexican government, not the centralist. They asked for a repeal of the law of April 6, 1830, as well as the ban of immigration to be removed. The group asked to exempt Texans from customs duty tax and split the Colla Tejas into 2. That way both sides could have its own government. Austin left to gain the support of the Tejano community. While away, Mexican officials refused to send the request to the Mexican government. In the system, it's not always guaranteed to get sent to the Mexican government. As well as this convention, they also managed to set up a large amount of militias.
While Austin was away, the delegates held another convention. That was held by William Horton. The group repeated that they wished for the same things as their last convention. The only change was that they had added a proposal that they asked for a new state added to Mexico. The Mexicans, for some who were sympathetic with the Texans, however, some took a defiance to the government. This was known as the Convention of April 1st, 1833. Question number 10. What was the difference in the second convention than the first? A. Proposing for a new state. B. Threatening to destroy Mexico. C. A nuclear bomb. Or D. A weapon that was unheard of.
Been arrested for not being a loyal citizen to Mexico. As Austin sat in prison, he realized the only way to get freedom is through conflict. When Austin returned to Texas from prison, he learned that a dispute was going on between Texans and Cossa's army. Austin encouraged the people to take action and fight for freedom. Cossa's army marched to arrest all Texans who opposed him. On the way, Coss was informed that the people of Gonzales held a 6-pound cannon provided by an impresario, Green DeWitt.
When Coss reached Gonzales, Alcide Andrew refused to give up the cannon without orders. The patrol crossed the river, waiting for a written order. The Texans used this time to bury the cannon and prepare for the soldiers' return. Word quickly spread in the area that Mexican soldiers planned to return from San Antonio and take the cannon. In response, 160 citizens rallied in Gonzales. and elected J.H. Moore as their leader. They then dug up the cannon and prepared to use it once the Mexican soldiers returned. Near the cannon, they flew a flag with the words inscribed, "Come and take it," to show their defiance towards the Mexican government. Francisco Cast Anita led 100 men to Gonzales to take the cannon. They arrived on September 29th and saw the armed Texans waiting on the other side of the Guadalupe River. October 2nd, Moore's men crossed the river and fired the tiny but loud cannon toward the Mexican soldiers. Cas Anita ordered his troops to retreat to San Antonio. This battle was known as the Battle of Gonzales. It showed that Texans were becoming much more defiant towards the Mexican government, and they were willing to use military force if necessary. Question number 11. What was the name of the river Moore's men crossed? A. The Colorado River, B. The Guadalupe River, C. The Red River, or D. The Mexican River?
Texans learned about the battle, and volunteers poured into the area, prepared to fight. But when they arrived, the battle was already over. They decided to continue to San Antonio to drive out Mexican soldiers for good. As Cos continued to march to San Antonio, he sent 30 soldiers to Goliad to guard the Mexican fort. Shortly after their arrival, a group of Texans attacked the fort and forced the Mexican soldiers to surrender.
Even though this battle was small, it was very important for the Texans for two reasons. One, it convinced them that the Mexican army could be defeated, and two, the Texans' victory at Goliad cut off a major supply route for the Mexican army. On October 1835, Texans at Gonzales organized themselves into the Army of People and elected Stephen Austin as their leader. Austin led the army to attack Cos at San Antonio, gathering volunteers along the way. When they arrived, a brief fight broke out, and the Mexican troops retreated farther into San Antonio. Texans remained there and began their discussion about the changing situations. The meeting of delegate in San Felipe was called the Consultation. It began on November 4th, 1835. Texan settlers urged the delegates to declare independence from Mexico. Those who were part of the Peace Party wanted to remain loyal to Mexico, but still fight in support of the Constitution of 1824. 2 days later, on the 6th, the consultation voted against declaring independence, but on the 7th they adopted the Declaration of the People in Texas in General Convention assembled, which stated that they would remain loyal citizens of Mexico. They declared that the only reason they fought was for their own protection and to stand up for the Constitution of 1824, and they encouraged others to join them. They set up a temporary government and decided to meet again on March 1st, 1836, to make a final decision about Texas's independence. This was later finalized at the Convention of 1836. The consultation asked Stephen Austin and his revolutionaries to set out to the United States in hopes of raising troops and money for their cause. People also began to realize that they were going to have to fight for their independence, so people began to rally each other in order to become free.
What did the Texans realize about Mexico during this time? A. They were very strong. B. They could never be defeated. C. They liked to dance. Or D. They could easily be defeated. Many Texans thought the centralist threat had ended. After the Battle of San Antonio, Edward Burleson gave command to Francis Johnson. Johnson then took part in an expedition to Matamoros, and command got passed down to Colonel James Neal. Colonel James Fannin was in charge of another force near Goliad. With General Cross in retreat, there were no Mexican troops left in Texas. However, the capture of Antonio Tenorio and his men in Anahuac, as well as Cross's army in San Antonio, enraged Santa Anna. As Cross continued to retreat, Santa Anna started from the north with a large army.
He felt that to get Texas under Mexican control again, he would have to rid Texas of all the Anglos and the Tejanos that defied him. Texans were unaware that Santa Anna had decided to lead his army into Texas. They thought that he would wait until spring to attack them. As a result, Texans' forces remained unorganized and scattered. Their lack of preparation would cost them the Battle of the Alamo. Neal knew that he didn't have enough soldiers to defend the Alamo because most of them had returned home. Others followed James Grant and Colonel Francis Johnson on a mission to the Matamoros to reclaim land that had been taken from them by the Santa Anna's government. After their departure, Neal commanded an army of only 30 men.
Colonel James Bowie and his men had reached San Antonio with orders to destroy the Alamo. However, Bowie and Neal decided to stay and fight. Bowie agreed to serve under Neal and help as the work of preparing the Alamo's defenses continued. Bowie's men were rebels and not considered regular soldiers in the Texas Army. However, Neal still welcomed them with open arms. Governor Smith asked William Barrett Travis to recruit 100 men and lead them to San Antonio to support Neal. But he could only raise 29 men. They arrived at the Alamo on February 23rd. David Crockett, a former colonel, a member of Congress from Tennessee, arrived on February 8th with only a dozen men. He had also come to join the fight in Texas. In mid-February, Neal left San Antonio due to some family emergencies. He placed William Barrett Travis in charge at only the age of 26.
Bowie and his men were not pleased with Travis and demanded an election of officers, in tradition among volunteer forces. The groups were split between the volunteers and the soldiers. Bowie and David set aside their personal differences and agreed to a joint command. Only 2 weeks later, Bowie became seriously ill and decided to pass the command to Travis. When the news came of Santa Anna's arrival on February 23rd, this began the siege of the Battle of the Alamo. Travis desperately needed troops and sent out a letter begging the following community to help against the siege of the Alamo. For 13 days, Mexican cannons fired at the Alamo, and their troops prepared for battle. By March 5th, 1,800 troops had surrounded the Alamo. Mexican soldiers raised a red flag, meaning no mercy, and the next day the war had begun. As the bugle called, Mexicans launched into the battle, and Travis shouted, "Mexicans are coming!" and raced to the north wall. As he was the first to die in the battle, the Texas cannons fired as the mass amounts of Mexican soldiers, but the Alamo's defenses were quickly breached, and the battle ended 90 minutes after this. Mexico was victorious at the Battle of Alamo.
How many days did the Mexican cannons fire at the Alamo? A. 23, B. 13, C. 7, and D. 11. Were being taken as slaves after surrendering at the Battle of Colito. Most men assumed they would be released back to their homes because they surrendered and did not fight to the death. The Texans were marched back to Goliad and held prisoners for a week. Fannin was under the impression that no one would be executed, but Santa Anna saw differently and ordered all the captives to be killed. On March 27th, the men that were able to walk were marched out of prison in 3 columns, with the belief that they were being sent home. But Mexicans began to open fire on them. Only a few men escaped during the confusion and began to spread the word of the massacre. This was known as the Goliad Massacre.
It's now April 20th, 1836. A skirmish developed between the Mexican army and the Texas cavalry. The next day, on the 21st, the Battle of San Jacinto had begun. Houston's troops outnumbered the Mexican troops. During the night, reinforcements came to the aid of Santa Anna. and by the morning they had more than 1,300 troops. Houston ordered that the Vence Bridge, Mexico's only exit, to be burned. Houston's army attacked in the middle of the night while the Mexicans were resting and quickly pushed the troops into a scattered formation as they chanted, "Remember the Alamo! Remember Goliad!" This battle lasted only 18 minutes. Texans continued to be captured until the dark. Houston's report said that they killed 630 Mexicans and captured 730. Santa Anna escaped during the battle and hid in a nearby barn, but was later discovered by Houston. Houston was known as the Man of Destiny because he captured Santa Anna. Number 14. What caused Texans to start the Battle of San Jacinto? A. The Goliad Massacre. B. The burning of the Vence Bridge. C. The election of 1827. Or D. The death of James Bowie.
Burnett served as an interim president for only 6 months. In July, he called for a re-election. In September, Henry Smith, the governor of the provisional government, and Stephen Austin both expressed interest in presidency. Still recovering from his injury, Houston returned to Texas a few days before the election and made it clear he would accept the post if elected. Houston received the most votes out of everyone, and Texas voted to seek immediate joining to the U.S. Houston's victory at San Jacinto proved he was the best choice for the first president of the Republic of Texas. This was considered the first meeting of Congress.
In 1839, the Texas Congress formed a commission to seek a site for the new capital to be named after Stephen F. Austin. Maribel B. Lamar, second president of the newly formed Republic of Texas, advised the commissioners to investigate an area named Waterloo, noting that the area's hills, waterways, and pleasant surroundings. Waterloo was selected, and the name Austin was chosen as the town's new name. The name Austin is considered to be derived from the Augustine, a variant of Augustus. The location was seen as a convenient crossroads for trade routes between Santa Fe and Galveston Bay, and is well-known routes between northern Mexico and the Red River. Austin is also the site where the southern leg of the Chisholm Trail leads to the Colorado River. The 14-block grid was a plan bisected by the broad north-south thoroughfare, Congress Avenue, running up from the river to Capitol Square, where the new Texas state capitol was to be constructed. A temporary one-story capitol was erected on the corner of Colorado and 8th Street. On August 1, 1839, the first auction of 217 out of 306 lots were sold. The grid plan Waller designed and surveyed now forms the basis of downtown Austin.
Has come a long way from simple-minded Republicans that the state started off as. To think that Texas is the only state to have 6 other national flags fly over it: Spain, French, Mexico, the Republic of Texas, Confederate States, and the United States. We now accept the differences that arise in our communities peacefully instead of going to battle to solve them. Texas is rapidly developing into the second largest state in the United States, with cities such as Houston are in the top 5 most populated cities in the U.S. We should all be proud of our Lone Star heritage. I hope you guys learned and enjoyed the video.